I didn't ruin my life. That's the lie that kept me comfortable for a long time. I told myself ruin only comes from loud mistakes, from choosing the wrong person, the wrong path, the wrong moment. From dramatic failures you can point to and regret openly. My life didn't look like that. Nothing collapsed. Nothing exploded. There was no single decision I could blame. That's why it took me so long to understand what had happened. My life didn't fall apart. It thinned out. From the outside, it looked intact. Functional. Even respectable. I showed up. I did what was expected. I handled responsibilities. I kept going. People trusted me. Some even admired me for how steady I seemed. Inside, I felt like I was slowly becoming transparent. At some point, I stopped reacting to things the way I used to. Good news didn't lift me. Bad news didn't break me. Everything landed at the same muted distance, as if my emotions were happening in another room. I told myself that was maturity. That's how it always starts, with a story that sounds reasonable. You explain away the dullness as growth, the exhaustion as adulthood, the emptiness as discipline. You convince yourself that wanting less is wisdom. I didn't wake up one day and decide to disappear. I practiced it. Quietly. Daily. Every time I chose the safest option instead of the truest one. Every time I stayed silent to avoid friction. Every time I postponed something that mattered because it didn't fit neatly into my life as it already was. I told myself I was being careful. Careful became my personality. There was a time when I used to imagine futures. Not in detail, but with energy. With a sense that something awaited me, something undefined but alive. Over the years, those images faded. Not because I stopped believing in them, but because I stopped allowing them space. Hope requires room. I filled mine with routine. Days became efficient. Predictable. I moved through them without resistance, which felt like peace at first. But peace without engagement slowly turns into numbness. I stopped noticing time as it passed. Weeks disappeared. Months slid by without leaving memories behind. When people asked how I was doing, I answered honestly, or so I thought. I'm okay. I was okay in the same way a room with no windows is okay. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is alive. At night, when the noise finally stopped, I felt the weight of something unnamed pressing against my chest. Not panic. Not sadness. Just a quiet heaviness that made it hard to breathe deeply. I would lie there and wonder when I had last felt truly present. The answer was always earlier than I wanted it to be. I realized I had been living as if life were something that would begin later, after the next obligation, the next milestone, the next version of myself arrived. I treated my own existence like a waiting room. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for certainty. Waiting for permission. But permission never comes. The scariest realization was that nothing was forcing me to stay where I was. There were no visible chains. No explicit barriers. I wasn't trapped by circumstance. I was held in place by habit and fear dressed up as reason. Fear of wanting too much. Fear of wanting the wrong thing. Fear of discovering that if I reached out, there might be nothing there. So I stayed exactly where I was. And staying slowly taught me that my own absence was acceptable. I noticed it in conversations. How often I spoke without revealing anything real. How often I listened without absorbing. I was present enough to function, absent enough to remain untouched. People didn't notice. That's the danger. You can disappear in plain sight if you do it politely. Sometimes, I caught my reflection when I wasn't expecting it, in a dark window, a mirror, a photo taken by someone else. There was a look in my eyes that unsettled me. Not sadness. Vacancy. I started asking myself questions I had avoided for years. Not dramatic ones. Simple ones. Dangerous ones. If nothing changes, will I notice my life passing? If nothing changes, will I ever feel fully here again? The answers didn't arrive immediately. They formed slowly, like something surfacing from deep water. And when they did, they terrified me. Because the truth wasn't that I had chosen wrong. The truth was that I hadn't really chosen at all. I had let my life happen without my participation. I had mistaken motion for direction, endurance for meaning, and safety for fulfillment. And the longer I stayed inside that illusion, the harder it became to remember who I was before I learned how to disappear so well. That night, standing alone, I finally admitted something I had avoided naming. Nothing in my life was broken. But something essential was missing. And I was the only one who could admit that it had been missing for a long time. After admitting that to myself, everything familiar began to feel slightly unreal. The same places, the same routines, the same conversations, nothing had changed, and yet everything felt exposed. Like a set after the lights come on. I could see the seams. I could see how carefully my life had been constructed to keep me functional, not fulfilled. I started noticing how often I avoided myself. How I filled silence with noise. How I reached for my phone the moment a thought felt too close. How I scheduled my days so tightly that there was no room left for reflection. I wasn't busy because I had too much to do. I was busy because I was afraid of what might surface if I slowed down. People kept telling me how together I seemed. How calm. How balanced. I accepted the compliments with a practiced smile, knowing that calm was the byproduct of disengagement. You can't be shaken if you're not fully present. That realization hurt more than panic ever could. My body began to protest in ways I could no longer ignore. Sleep stopped restoring me. I woke up tired, as if I had been carrying something heavy all night. My chest felt tight during ordinary moments, walking down the street, standing in line, listening to someone talk about plans that didn't include me. Sometimes my heart would race for no reason at all. I would stand there, breathing slowly, telling myself nothing was wrong. But something was wrong. I had been shrinking my inner world to match the size of my comfort zone. Every desire that didn't fit got edited out. Every impulse that felt inconvenient was postponed. Over time, I forgot how to tell the difference between fear and intuition. They both felt like caution. I began to grieve without knowing exactly what I was grieving. It wasn't a lost dream or a specific path. It was time. The quiet, invisible loss of years spent waiting for clarity that never arrived. Late at night, I replayed moments from the past not to relieve them, but to interrogate them. I searched for the point where I could have chosen differently. Where I might have listened instead of complied. There was no single moment to blame. Just a pattern. A long series of almosts. I almost left. I almost spoke. I almost chose myself. The moral dilemma grew heavier with each passing day. If I stayed exactly where I was, nothing terrible would happen. That was the promise. I would remain safe, respectable, and intact. I would continue being useful to others. I would avoid embarrassment, uncertainty, and visible failure. But I would also continue disappearing. If I left or even shifted, I would disrupt everything. I would confuse people. Disappoint expectations. I would lose the comfort of being understood and the protection of being predictable. I would have to face the possibility that I had waited too long. That possibility terrified me more than staying ever had. Some nights, the thought of disappearing returned. Not dying, disappearing. Walking away without explanations. Letting go of the version of myself everyone else knew. Starting somewhere I wasn't already defined. The idea scared me. And relieved me. That contradiction was impossible to ignore. I tried to argue with myself. I listed reasons to stay. Gratitude. Responsibility. Stability. I had practiced these arguments for years. They used to work. Now they sounded hollow, like a script recited long after the meaning had drained out of it. Then came a moment so ordinary it almost passed unnoticed. Someone asked me a simple question, without accusation or drama. Do you feel like you're living the life you wanted? I laughed automatically. The answer was supposed to be easy, polite, final. But the laugh faded before it finished. Because the truth was sitting right there, unprotected. I don't know when I stopped wanting, I said quietly. I think I just adapted. The words hung in the air longer than I expected. They felt dangerous, not because they were dramatic, but because they were honest. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was anxious, but because something in me refused to go back to pretending. I realized that my life wasn't falling apart. It was wearing thin. And the scariest part was this, no one else could see it. From the outside, everything still looked fine. That meant the responsibility was mine alone. I wasn't trapped by circumstances. I was trapped by habit. And habits only keep their power as long as you don't question them. For the first time, staying felt like an active decision instead of a default. And once a decision becomes visible, it becomes heavy. It asks to be owned. I knew the next step would cost me something: comfort, certainty, approval, or time. I just didn't know yet which cost I was willing to pay. I didn't leave in a way anyone would notice right away. There was no announcement, no dramatic exit, no speech that tied everything together neatly. I simply stopped cooperating with the version of my life that required my quiet disappearance. Leaving didn't feel brave. It felt overdue. There comes a point where staying no longer feels like stability, it feels like consent. Consent to a slow erosion you can finally see for what it is. Once I understood that, I couldn't unknow it. Every familiar routine became heavier, not because it was difficult, but because it was deliberate. I had been choosing this life. Every day. That realization stripped away the comfort of neutrality. I could no longer tell myself I was just waiting, just adapting, just being patient. I was participating in my own absence, and participation comes with responsibility. So I began withdrawing, not from places, but from expectations. I stopped explaining myself in advance. I stopped smoothing discomfort so others wouldn't feel it. I stopped performing gratitude for a life that no longer felt like mine. These were small acts, almost invisible, but they changed everything. People noticed the gaps before they noticed the change. You seem different, they said. You're quieter. You don't seem as available. They were right. I wasn't available anymore, not to disappear on demand. Fear reacted immediately. It reminded me of everything I could lose: security, approval, belonging, identity. It told me how late I was, how embarrassing it would be to start now, how much easier it would be to stay and finish what I had already begun. And for a while, that fear almost won. There were nights when loneliness felt like punishment. When doubt replayed my past decisions with surgical precision, pointing out every reason I had to stay exactly where I was. Nights when I wondered if I had mistaken numbness for danger, if I was destroying something functional in pursuit of something imagined. But even in those moments, something was different. I could feel myself again. The pain wasn't dull anymore. It was sharp. Immediate. Honest. And that hurt, but it also proved that something inside me was still alive. I wasn't fading quietly anymore. I was reacting. Starting over didn't feel like freedom. It felt like emptiness. Like standing in a room after everything familiar has been removed, unsure where anything belongs. Without the structure of expectation, I had to confront myself directly: my fears, my hesitations, my long neglected wants. I was clumsy. Slow. Often unsure. I made choices without guarantees and lived with the discomfort of not knowing whether they were right. I had to learn how to be present without a script. And slowly, something shifted. Time stopped slipping through me unnoticed. Days regained weight. Even ordinary moments felt anchored, because I was actually there for them. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was choosing imperfectly, inconsistently, but consciously. I grieved the years I had lost. That grief didn't vanish when I left. It still visits me sometimes, uninvited. I mourn the version of myself that could have existed if I had listened sooner. But I no longer let that grief decide my future. I learned something I wish I had understood earlier: regret doesn't come from choosing wrong. It comes from never choosing at all. From outsourcing your life to fear, habit, and convenience until there's nothing left to reclaim. Leaving didn't make me happy in a simple, constant way. There was no permanent relief, no final clarity. But it gave me something far more valuable. Ownership. Ownership of my fear. Ownership of my uncertainty. Ownership of whatever comes next, even if it fails. I no longer confuse endurance with strength. I no longer confuse stability with safety. And I no longer confuse survival with living. If you're listening to this and something inside you feels heavy, restless, uncomfortably awake, I want to tell you to disappear or start over. Not every life requires an exit. But every life requires honesty. Ask yourself gently, without judgment, whether the life you're protecting is actually sustaining you, or quietly wearing you down. Ask yourself how much of your patience is wisdom, and how much of it is fear disguised as responsibility. Because one day, without warning, you may realize that nothing is breaking, and you are still disappearing. I didn't ruin my life. I let it slip away slowly, politely, convincingly. Walking away didn't save everything. It saved what was left of me. And choosing yourself late is painful. But choosing yourself at all is still choosing life.